Good morning, everyone. The committee will come to order. Pursuant to notice, the Committee on Science and Technology meets to consider the following measures. H.R. 2693, the Oil Pollution Research and Development Program Reauthorization Act of 2010, and H.R. 5716, the Safer Oil Natural Gas Drilling Technology Research and Development Act. We will now proceed with the markup. Today, the committee will consider two bills that address oil spill cleanup technologies and response coordination, as well as research and development of safe drilling technologies. First, we will consider H.R. 2693, authored by Ms. Woolsey of California. This bill was introduced and marked up in the Subcommittee on Energy and Environment last summer. And Ms. Woolsey's foresight in introducing this legislation last year put us one step closer to advancing a robust federal research and development program on oil spill response. And I thank Ms. Woolsey for her foresight. At the time, Ms. Woolsey was responding to a spill in her district, but the Deepwater Horizon accident and the subsequent response effort have made the intent of this bill all the more relevant today. In light of that, the amendment in the nature of a substitute to be marked up today sets up a more efficient federal management structure, reprioritizes the research and development activities, and provides for more robust oversight and accountability of the interagency R&D program. Second, we will consider H.R. 5716, the Safer Oil Natural Gas Drilling Technology Research and Development Act. This bill amends Section 999 of the Energy Policy Act of 2005, which authorizes the Secretary of Energy to establish an ultra-deepwater and unconventional onshore natural gas and other petroleum resources research and development program. As a longtime champion of this program, Mr. Hall recognized its potential for developing technologies to prevent and mitigate oil spills, and worked closely with us in drafting this bill. The bill makes a series of changes to the 999 program, including a shift in the focus and funding of the program to research and development of technologies for safety and accident prevention and mitigation. This bill will also streamline the operation of the program. It is our hope that with passage of this bill, activities conducted under Section 999 will better serve the nation's needs for the development of advanced and improved environmental and worker safety technologies and practices, while also providing a federal resource for technical expertise in the field. This bill is a product of significant bipartisan cooperation, and I want to thank Mr. Hall and his staff for their continued good work as we move this legislation out of committee and to the floor. The two bills before us today help to ensure that our stakeholders, including the federal government, industry, and academia, are better equipped to prevent and respond to such accidents in the future. Let me also bring up another point. As I think everyone on this committee knows, it has been a long tradition of the committee to request that amendments be presented by 10 o'clock the day before the bill is brought up. There is a good reason for this, and that is particularly when we're at a full committee markup, that we want to send a bill to the floor that doesn't have unintended consequences by a late amendment, and that's the reason that they need to be vetted. I think that doesn't mean that we're not going to hear an amendment that might be brought like that. It just makes it a higher burden on the person who brings that. Our committee staff, our members have been very good in that. We had a couple of amendments, both Democratic and Republican this time, that were a little late, although we did have notice on some of those. So, again, and I know a part of the problem is just getting legislative counsel to get things through. So let me just once again ask everybody to try to get those up. Let me also give a quick overview of what our intentions are for at least the rest of this month. We have a nuclear energy research bill that we think is important and good, that will move forward research in the fourth generation design that could make nuclear energy safer and less expensive. Also in less likely to be proliferating, and hopefully less to have to store. So that is in the works in a bipartisan way. We also have a NASA reauthorization that we are struggling with, and we hope that the first of next week that we can have a good discussion about where we think we're going on that. As I had mentioned to someone earlier, when you try to put 2 tons of canaries in a 1-ton box, it makes it tough, and so, but we're still trying to stuff them in there. And finally, we hope to have a rare earth minerals bill up. As you might remember from our testimony, 90 to 95% of the rare earth minerals production in the world are in the hands of the Chinese. There was some hints from them earlier that they might try to restrict those to the rest of the world. The reason that is important is that those rare earth minerals in small amounts can significantly increase the efficiency of alternative energy, telecommunication, as well as a lot of other products. I just returned from a very quick jet-lag trip to Brussels to testify before our equivalent in their EU Parliament, and requested that they also take up rare earth minerals, which I think we're going to see them do that, so that hopefully there can be some joint research as we are both in the same boat and can help each other in terms of that basic research where there really isn't a first-to-market advantage. So I thank you all for your attendance and participation this morning. I look forward to a productive markup. I now recognize Mr. Hall to present his opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As the disaster in the Gulf nears now, about 3 months, and we await the results of the latest attempt to cap the well and stop the leak, our understanding of the very precise causes of the accident and missteps in the days that followed remain unclear even now. These unanswered questions should serve to advise against temptations to overreact, especially given the importance of the offshore oil and gas industry to the Gulf Coast industry and economy and America's energy independence goals. Regardless of the ultimate causes of and best responses to the disaster, it makes sense to continue pursuing improvements to safe and environmentally responsible drilling operations, as well as effective spill response systems. The first bill we consider, H.R. 2693, amends the Oil Pollution Act of 1990. This bill was introduced last year and had gone through a subcommittee markup. The current bill illustrates the need to update certain aspects of the research and development title of the Oil Pollution Act since its passage 20 years ago. Further, it will be important for us to continue to exercise our congressional duties and perform the necessary oversight to ensure that the laws we pass are being implemented and certainly carried out. Today, we mark up an amendment in the nature of a substitute that changes the bill in ways that seek to address members' concerns, as well as concerns expressed by expert witnesses. I applaud the author's willingness to move her bill in a direction that alleviates these concerns, and while there are still some unresolved issues, the approach of the ANS in correcting the problem of insecure law is more in line with what we heard from scientists, industries, and we heard from stakeholders as it should be. The second bill we consider amends the drilling technologies R&D programs established by Section 999 of the Energy Policy Act of 2005. I led and helped to work with the creation of this program in 2005, and I believe it's contributed significantly to recent technological advances that are enabling recovery of energy supplies that we know existed but we were unable to access. The program relies on established program structure and network of worldwide private and public sector experts. The funding for the program is drawn from the taxes paid by the industry on oil leases, and that money is paid back with eventual royalties on oil and natural gas that is discovered and used as a result of the program. I've always said that this program is a win-win for taxpayers. Not only do Americans move in the direction of energy independence, but the program pays for itself. Further, this is the only R&D program in the federal government capable of addressing drilling safety and accident prevention-related technology needs in a timely and effective manner. As the present spill in the Gulf illustrates, we should encourage further research into this vital area so that we're best able to amend needed resources safely and effectively. Unfortunately, despite its clear growing in importance, the program, along with most other fossil fuel R&D activities, remain targeted by the administration and others in Congress for termination. I think this represents a clear misprioritization, and I'm glad that the Chairman Gordon agrees and has worked very closely with us on the vehicle before us today. I may quibble with some of the details, but I believe this vehicle represents a reasonable compromise that will preserve and strengthen this successful program. Before I close, I do want to say a word about the process, as the Chairman has. Many amendments, including one of my own, were filed well after the 10 o'clock deadline. However, the majority of the Republican colleagues worked hard and met or came very close to meeting the submission deadline. I may have more to say about this on matters as we move forward today, but I do want to mention amendments introducing significant policy shift or additions we wish they would be filed earlier rather than later, so members and staff might thoroughly review and prepare for their consideration. I know the Chairman agrees with this, as he's stated in the past and stated today. Again, I thank the Chairman and the majority for working with Republicans on both sides of the bills, and I look forward to continuing this result and find a good result. Continue our effort as these vehicles move through the legislative process. I thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. Members may place statements in the record at this point. We will now consider H.R. 2693, the Oil Pollution Research and Development Program Reauthorization Act of 2010. As I mentioned earlier, this is Ms. Woolsey's bill, but I understand that she is going to wait to talk more about it till her amendment. So I will now recognize Mr. Hall to present any amendments or any remarks on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In the wake of the Exxon Valdez accident, Congress enacted the Oil Pollution Act of 1990. This law addressed deficiencies in response activities, adjusted natural resource damage assessments, clarified issues related to liability concerns, and encouraged a research and development program to help prepare us for any future spills. 20 years later, Congress is responding to a major oil spill. It'll be the catalyst for a major change in exploring and producing oil and natural gas. Members have asked many questions regarding the success of the research and development program spelled out in the Oil Pollution Act. Last month, the Energy and Environmental Subcommittee held a hearing to discuss the state of cleanup technologies and what it needed and what is actually needed moving forward to provide the necessary tools to those who respond to disasters. It was clear from this hearing that our nation has made little progress in these cleanup technologies over the last 20 years. The amendment, in the nature of substitute, is a good effort to address the many concerns that members on both sides of the aisle had with the introduced version. The ANS maintains the Coast Guard as the chair of the Interagency Committee, but whittles down the participants on the committee to Coast Guard, NOAA, EPA, and the Department of Interior. While I understand the concerns that the Interagency Committee was too wieldy, we heard testimony that the current structure works. So I'm left wondering if this is a case of a solution in search of a problem, given that this agency and these agencies did not express a problem with the current structure. I'm pleased to see that they're increasing reporting requirements and duties of the chair to ensure greater accountability and information for Congress. We must also do our due diligence and perform the necessary oversight so the lapses of the last 20 years are not repeated. I'm also a bit concerned that the direction of the ANS has shifted the focus of the underlying statute to concentrate much more on the environmental effects of the cleanup technologies rather than the effectiveness of the technologies themselves. While researching and understanding the environmental effects of technology use is important and should definitely be a part of this program, it should not be to the detriment of the overreaching focus of the law, which reads, quote, research, technology, development, and demonstration, unquote. I understand that there will be an amendment offered today that will alleviate these concerns. So hopefully the bill that's reported out is more balanced between the two. A provision in ANS that amends the section of international cooperation has given me pause. Consideration and collaboration with other nations and foreign research entities on cleanup standards is a highly contentious issue. And all we need to do to see this is to read the reports of the last 3 months where foreign aid was offered in the cleanup of the Deepwater Horizon. Offers were made to the U.S. government, to BP, and sometimes to both. There's been a lot of confusion as to who has the authority to accept the assistance, and there have been suggestions that assistance was rebuffed solely due to the cost of the equipment. Some international assistance could not be accepted because the technologies were not compatible with our own. It would be more helpful for the international research coordination and collaboration to focus on the developing ways to make these technologies work together before focusing on what the cleanup standards should really be used. I ask my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to consider each amendment carefully. When the country is in the midst of a crisis and Congress decides to act, it is possible for us to go too far to fix things that end up causing unintended consequences. Acting deliberatively and in a much more focused manner will help the current situation and ultimately prevent the necessity of having to go back and fix things that resulted unexpectedly. Mr. Chairman, I thank you and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. I ask unanimous consent that the bill is considered as read and open to amendment at any point, and that the members proceed with amendments in the order of the roster without objection. So ordered.
I reserve the right to object.
Certainly. Okay. Okay. Well, so do you want to address those questions now? So
I will.
Okay, sure.
Sure. I'd ask the chairman to confirm for the members a few matters in regard to the full committee markup process for H.R. 2693 and the accompanying amendment in the nature of a substitute. First, Mr. Chairman, you're not asking unanimous consent that the amendment in the nature of a substitute be considered base text for the purposes of amendment?
No, we're not.
And I thank you, Mr. Chairman. Historically, when considering an ANS, this committee, after unanimous consent request by the chairman, treated the ANS as base text for purposes of amendment, allowing for 2 degrees of amendment. Mr. Chairman, at our last full committee markup in April, we discussed a matter of concern to both sides of the aisle, and that's the policy that members try their best to file amendments by 10 a.m. the day prior to a markup. Mr. Chairman, during the Technology and Innovation Subcommittee markup, you stated that the responsibility for getting things in on time was on the Democratic members as well as on the Republican members. For this markup, several amendments were not filed nor shared with the minority until quite some time past the deadline. I acknowledge that even one of my amendments was a bit tardy. It's my understanding for the purposes of this markup, Mr. Chairman, you're not going to be disinclined to support those amendments that were substituted or shared in a tardy fashion. For that.
As I said in my earlier remarks, no, they will not automatically be blocked, but there will be a higher burden placed on the person who has that amendment since they need to be fully vetted.
Mr. Chairman, I thank you for your comments on these issues, and I thank you for the other many conferences that we've held that you've been kind with your and free with your time, and I thank you for that. I withdraw my reservation.
Mr. Chairman, I have a parliamentary inquiry.
Who is? Mr. Sensenbrenner is recognized.
Yes, I noticed that most of the amendments are drafted as amendments to the amendment in the nature of a substitute. Wouldn't it be proper that the amendment in the nature of a substitute be offered first so that we have something to amend?
You're correct. That's what we're trying to do.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Hall and Mr. Sensenbrenner. I think it's good to get those things clarified. Now, without objection, so ordered. The first amendment on the roster is an amendment in the nature of a substitute offered by the gentlelady from California, Ms. Woolsey. Are you ready to proceed with your amendment?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment number 296, amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 2693, offered by Ms. Woolsey of California.
I ask unanimous consent to dispense with the reading. Without objection, so ordered. I recognize the gentlelady for 5 minutes to explain the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just before I explain the amendment, I'd like just to briefly say how we got to this amendment. I think we'll all remember that a little over 2 years ago, there was an oil spill in the San Francisco Bay, And it was because of that experience that it became very clear to this member of Congress that there is a big question of who's in charge of the prevention and the cleanup and of taking care of the lasting impacts to our environment. So I introduced H.R. 2693. That was a good idea then, but it is an even better idea now, and the amendment in the nature of a substitute is a much better fit since we've learned so much more since the Gulf oil and the BP spill. So I will just, that was my introduction to how we got here, and now I'd like to explain the amendment. The amendment in the nature of a substitute strikes and replaces the language of H.R. 2693 to amend Title VII of the Oil Pollution Act of 1990. Section 2 of the amendment in the nature of a substitute amends the membership structure of the Interagency Coordinating Committee on Oil Pollution Research to better align and streamline the coordinating committee to ensure that the research program is actually effective. This Interagency Coordinating Committee includes representatives from the Coast Guard, NOAA, the Department of Interior, and EPA. The Interagency Committee is also required to collaborate with the other federal agencies listed in the Oil Pollution Act of 1990 with the inclusion of the National Science Foundation. Section 2 also includes roles for the chair of the Interagency Committee, activities for the committee to ensure an ongoing, sustained, and coordinated research effort, and an information exchange to improve the accessibility and utility of information among the federal agencies, the research community, and emergency responders. Section 3 includes a research and implementation plan to be submitted to Congress 180 days after the date of an enactment, which shall be periodically updated. And the Interagency Committee shall solicit the advice and guidance on the plan from the Oil Pollution Research Advisory Committee, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, and a 30-day public comment period. The plan shall also be reviewed by the National Academy of Sciences to assist its adequacy. Section 4 of the bill includes several changes to the Oil Pollution Research and Development Program. The amendment in the nature of a substitute adds research elements such as research development and demonstration for new or improved response capabilities and modeling for the recovery, removal, and disposal of oil. This includes mechanical capabilities for the recovery of oil and chemical and biological methods, such as the use of dispersants, solvents, and bioremediation technologies and methods to address oil discharges on land and in inland waters. And the EPA must focus on the development and approval of technologies with maximum effectiveness and minimum toxicity to the environment in both the near and long term. Section 4, Mr. Chairman, also bolsters the research role of NOAA by including language requiring NOAA to monitor and evaluate the environmental effects of oil discharges throughout the environment, including air quality and in sensitive and high-risk areas. Section 5 provides a simple provision for the Interagency Committee to coordinate and cooperate with other nations and foreign research entities in conducting oil pollution research, development, and demonstration activities, including activities related to oil recovery and cleanup standards. Section 6 adds another layer of accountability to ensure ongoing research and development activities by requiring the Interagency Committee to submit an annual report to Congress concurrent with the President's annual budget request. Section 7 directs the chair of the Interagency Committee to establish an Oil Pollution Research Advisory Committee, in part to provide an additional layer of oversight. The Advisory Committee complies with the Federal Advisory Committee Act, FACA, with the exception that it will not expire. This exception has been invoked so that the Advisory Committee may provide advice and comment on an ongoing basis to ensure the program and activities are sustained. Section 7 also requires that the advisory committee be comprised of representatives from non-governmental entities to review, advise, and comment on the interagency committee's activities, including the management and functioning of the interagency committee and the collaborating agencies, the development of new or improved response capabilities, and other research and resources needed to develop a comprehensive oil pollution research program. Finally, Mr. Chairman, the amendment in the nature of a substitute alters the funding levels to carry out this section. It increases the authorized levels from $22 million to $30 million, with an additional $16 million carved out for NOAA and $2 million for the demonstration projects, which totals $48 million. This amendment is the product of a cooperative effort between both majority and minority committee staff. They have worked really hard on this, and I so appreciate it. The amendment improves the Oil Pollution Act of 1990 and ensures that we are moving the country toward a more effective and streamlined research program. With that, Mr. Chairman, I urge my colleagues to support this very necessary amendment, and I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Woolsey, for your leadership and good explanation. Is there further discussion on the amendment? If not, the second amendment on the roster is also offered by the gentlelady from California, Ms. Woolsey. Are you ready to proceed with your amendment?
I am, Mr. Chairman. I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment number 162, amendment offered by Ms. Woolsey of California to the amendment in the nature of a substitute.
I ask unanimous consent to dispense with the reading. Without objection, so ordered. I recognize the gentlelady for 5 minutes to explain the amendment.
Mr. Chairman, this simple amendment makes a conforming correction to the word pollution and changes it to discharge. The word discharge is defined in the underlying law, the Oil Pollution Act of 1990. I want to ensure that we align the amendment in the nature of a substitute with the use of the word discharge. With that, I urge my colleagues to support this amendment.
Is there further discussion on the amendment?
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Hall is recognized.
Thank you. We support the amendment offered by the author of the bill. The changes the amendment makes to the ANS are simply consistent with the underlying act and improves the clarity of the congressional intent. I urge passage of this amendment, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. All in favor of the amendment say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. The third amendment on the roster is an amendment offered by the gentleman from Texas. Mr. Hall, are you ready to proceed with your amendment?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment number 004, amendment offered by Mr. Hall of Texas to the amendment in the nature of a substitute.
I ask unanimous consent to dispense with the reading. Without objection, so ordered. I recognize the gentleman for 5 minutes to explain his amendment.
Mr. Chairman, my amendment would insert the word containment into the bill in various places to elevate containing oil as a concept on par with prevention, detention, responding to, and mitigating oil damages and discharges. One of the major flaws in many government and industry response plans seems to be the lack of focus on containment. Once an oil discharge occurs, the fastest way to minimize the impact is to contain the oil in as small a geographic area as possible. So while people work to stop a leak from happening, others are making sure the oil doesn't spread so far within the environment that cleanup becomes a much larger task. Containment would allow the oil to be scooped up more easily and would also allow for removal by burning the oil when it's on the surface of the water. However, the oil has to be a certain thickness before it'll ignite. Containment is a technique that could be applied at any time in the period from the immediate aftermath of a spill until the cleanup is done. By amending the ANS and the underlying statute to include the idea as part of the research and development program, it'll help emphasize the utility of containment when industry submits incident response plans to the federal government and when government agencies accept those plans. I urge my colleagues to support the amendment. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Hall, for that timely amendment. If there's no further discussion, then the vote occurs on the amendment. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. No. The ayes have it. The fourth amendment on the roster is an amendment offered by the gentleman from Washington, Dr. Baird. Are you ready to proceed with your amendment?
I am indeed have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment number 047, amendment offered by Mr. Baird of Washington to the amendment in the nature of a substitute.
I ask unanimous consent to dispense with the reading. Without objection, so ordered. I recognize the gentleman for 5 minutes to explain the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be very brief on this. Analysis of what the factors that led to the disaster in the Gulf have indicated that decision-making and communication and prioritization of responsibility all probably contributed to this tragedy with the loss of 11 lives and all the pollution that has resulted. This amendment basically urges that we look at human factors, communication, decision-making, et cetera, as part of the research agenda. And it's a common sense amendment. This kind of measure is engaged in with the FAA, the nuclear power industry, Defense Department, et cetera. I think we ought to apply it to this industry as well.
Thank you, Dr. Baird. Is there further discussion on the amendment?
Mr. Chairman.
Paul is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Unfortunately, I'm unable to support this type of amendment. The underlying act outlines the focus area the research plan absolutely must address. The Interagency Committee is tasked with assessing the current state of knowledge, identifying significant gaps in the research, establishing research priorities, estimating the resources needed to conduct this research, and identifying, in coordination with states, the research needed for the regional research program. Within all these focus areas and with the individual research elements already laid out in the Act and in the ANS, I think it's safe to presume that risk assessment and risk analysis will be conducted on a continuous basis. How would the identification of information needed to conduct risk assessment and risk analysis not be included in the main focus area that I just mentioned? What do we gain by identifying the information in the research plan? If this was truly a research necessity, wouldn't it be covered by the Interagency Committee assessing the current status of knowledge and identifying the significant research gaps? I see no reason to include such a specific provision in a section of the bill that talks of generalities, and I'm concerned that such a provision would heavily shift the focus of the research from the purpose of the bill, which is research, technology, development, and demonstration, to assessing the risk of human factors and decision-making of causing oil spills. I yield back my time, sir.
Mr. Chairman.
Dr. Baird is recognized.
I want to clarify. It's certainly not the intent of this to shift the major focus of this enterprise to human factors. However, I think it's absolutely evident that the lack of attention to human factors in this industry very likely contributed to this spill. And I'm very respectful of the gentleman's desire to support this industry, but spills like this are very likely the biggest threat to the viability of the industry, let alone to the lives of the people who have been lost and to the environmental impacts. And if we are going to make this industry more safe, we absolutely have to attend to human factors. And the history of enterprises like this is that they tend not to address human factors until after a disaster. That was the case with 3 Mile Island. It was the case with the airline that crashed into the Potomac River. And all those other entities have made human factors a central part. And I think it's a responsibility of this Congress to direct the agencies and entities to focus on this measure for the safety of the public.
Would the gentleman yield?
I'd be happy.
Did I understand you correctly that in your opening statement that this was not a novel approach, but rather the Nuclear Regulatory Agency and other regulatory agencies already take this into consideration?
Absolutely. The postmortem on 3 Mile Island revealed that one of the reasons for that accident was human factors and the inadequacy of attending to human factors in the design of the plant and in the training of the staff technicians there. When that airplane crashed into Potomac River some years ago, it had ice on the wings. The analysis of the cockpit communications revealed that the co-pilot had grave concerns about the ice on the wings. The pilot basically overrode the co-pilot's concerns with the result of the loss of multiple lives. FAA now has dramatically increased its attention to human factors and changed the cockpit communication rules. We know that decisions along the line that led up to this disaster in the Gulf had to do with communication, with decision-making about a host of factors. We have scientific analysis that tells us how to do that better, and it's apparently been largely neglected in this industry. And I think we have, again, not just a right as a Congress, but a responsibility to direct the agency at least to give some attention to this and best practices. Finally, our witnesses in the hearing in our subcommittee repeatedly said, in fact, the minority's chosen witness, the minority's witness, said that the technology is in place to prevent these spills. This was human error that contributed to the failure. Well, if human error contributed to this failure and the minority witness so claimed, then it would seem to be in the minority's interest to prevent that human error.
Is there further discussion on the amendment?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Hall is recommended.
this is not opposed to research, just where this act puts it in the bill. This info would already be collected by in the underlying act. The Interagency Committee assesses the current status of knowledge and identifies the significant research gaps. This isn't a breaker of the bill or cause anyone to vote for or against the bill. I just thought I'd want to get of record our question, and I thank the gentleman for his answers.
Thank the gentleman from Texas.
All right. I think that we now have a record on this. So is there further discussion? If no, those in favor of the amendment say aye. Aye. Opposed say no. The ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. The fifth amendment on the roster is an amendment offered by the gentleman from New York, Mr. Tonko. Are you ready to proceed with your amendment?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
And I assume you have an amendment at the desk.
I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment number 012, amendment offered by Mr. Tonko of New York and Mr. Baird of Washington.
I ask unanimous consent to dispense with the reading. Without objection, so ordered. I recognize the gentleman for 5 minutes to explain the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Only hours after the news hit about the terrible disaster that was unfolding in the Gulf, the first thought of millions of Americans was to try and help. For some, that meant offering up technologies and ideas with which they're familiar on the best way to recover and clean up the oil spill. In response to this interest, a website and telephone number were set up to take information on the public's suggestions. However, after thousands of calls and submissions to the website, no one seemed to know what happened to those ideas. As we watch millions of gallons of oil continue to spill into the ocean, the open ocean, many ideas were still being evaluated. This kind of backup cannot happen again, Mr. Chair. We must take this opportunity through this legislation to correct the problem at hand. The Tonko-Baird amendment will make certain that this doesn't happen again. Our amendment would make the research plan as it exists include a methodology that provides for the solicitation, the evaluation, pre-approval, the funding and utilization of technologies and research projects developed by the public and private sector in advance of future oil discharges so that such technologies can be implemented if such an incident for response is required again. It is my firm belief that the innovation spirit of the American people can solve any problem, but it is up to us in Congress to make certain that that spirit can be developed in a way that provides real outcomes. This channels that talent in a very fundamental formula sort of way. I believe this amendment can do that sort of improvement. I want to thank Chairman Baird and his staff for working with me on this amendment, and I urge our colleagues to support the amendment and yield back the balance of my time, Mr. Chair, to Mr. Baird.
I thank Mr. Tonko and commend him for his leadership on this. We certainly heard during our testimony from people who had products or innovative ideas that they wanted to deploy should there be a spill, and they had found it to be very, very difficult to do so. That really is an opportunity lost, and the same applies to researchers. Researchers often feel that they need to understand certain aspects of what happens when oil's in the water, but they don't have a mechanism to pre-stage that research so it is ready in the event an incident occurs. Having that pre-staged, ready to go, pre-approved, and a mechanism by which it can be deployed can immeasurably help us gather information about real-world incidents, not just incidents in the lab. And so that's what Mr. Tonko is trying to do with the technology, and the research element that I've added is related to that. It's certainly something I've heard from a number of researchers and from incident commanders in the field who have said, we wish we had a mechanism to gather this data ready to go at our disposal, but we just don't, and there's just not time once the incident has happened to develop that in an expeditious manner. So that's the purpose of this.
Would the gentleman yield?
I'd be happy to.
Would this apply to Mr. Cosner's product that he put forth in his testimony before the committee?
I think that's precisely what we're looking at on the technology side, but there are also research studies that have the same kind of implication, and I think that's where Mr. Tonko is coming from, but I'll yield back to Mr. Tonko to respond to that.
No, I agree with Mr. Baird's comments. I think that there are those out there, there's a universe of talent that needs to have a better, more formal connection to a process that can certainly help us in response for incidents in the future.
Thank you, Mr. Tonko. Is there further discussion on the amendment? Mr. Hall is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And although I'm not necessarily opposed to the amendment, I was hoping the authors of the bill could explain how this language would work and how it differs from the National Contingency Plan or the NCP. And I apologize to Mr. Tonko, who tried to get in touch with me earlier today. I didn't get a chance to call back, or I'm sure he would have cleared up some of the problems that we had with it. I have a question as to how this amendment would make the current system any better. That's not a killer either, but how does the language ensure that technologies that really do work will be deployed when needed and not held up by some bureaucratic red tape? I'll be offering an amendment later on that would ensure that the one oil pollution technology testing facility our nation has stays focused on its primary goal and not stray into other areas that have resources at their disposal. If adopted, would the language in this amendment strengthen the principle of the amendments that I'll be offering? Would either Mr. Baird or Mr. Tonko answer that?
I think what we're trying to accomplish with the amendment is to have yet another gateway that allows for product development or research opportunities to be exchanged with the people who will be governing the response to these situations. I think it just opens up the connection and the possibilities for areas of involvement that people believe are just fit as a solution for the given situation. There were those who thought they could help tremendously with the oil spill, and they need to have, I think, the sort of clustering opportunity, the gathering of information that proves very useful.
Mr. Hall?
I'll yield back my time. I intend to vote for the amendment.
Since there's no further discussion, if the vote occurs on the amendment, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it. And the amendment is agreed to. The sixth amendment on the roster is the amendment offered by the gentleman from California, Comrade Robacher. Are you ready to proceed with your amendment?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me say something non-controversial first, and that is I'd like to thank the serious approach that Mr. Baird has taken to this issue. My understanding of the challenges we face have been enhanced by his leadership on this, and I appreciate that very much. But again, now to the controversial aspect of what I have to say.
And you do have an amendment at the desk.
Yes, I do. I have an amendment.
And the clerk will report that amendment.
Amendment number 005, amendment offered by Mr. Roybacher of California to the amendment in the nature of a substitute.
To dispense with the reading, without objection, so ordered. I recognize the gentleman for 5 minutes.
All right.
Explain the amendment.
So first, let me preface my remarks on the amendment by saying, once again, that we are spending billions of dollars every year on global warming research and very little on oil and natural gas drilling and cleanup technology. In fact, the Department of Energy has funneled all of their research funds for fossil fuels, critical areas that account for a huge proportion of our nation's annual energy needs. All of that money has been funneled, instead of into making it safer to achieve the oil and gas we need and that we depend upon, instead we've channeled all of it into carbon capture and sequestration. And I'm not sure there's any money that is spent by the United States government that is more foolish than that. And what happens is that leaves people in the private sector to pick up the load. Kevin Costner is an example of he stepped up and put his own money into it, and then to add insult to injury, where we're spending taxpayer dollars on foolishness, then we couldn't even get some sort of a stamp of approval to use that technology, so it stood there on the shelf all of these years instead of being ready for a crisis moment that we're in today. Likewise, British Petroleum, who has limited resources, channeled their resources into the politically correct considerations of alternative energy sources, while their primary job was oil and gas development, and they didn't spend their money developing the technologies that would have made that safer. So we need to make sure that that type of nonsense doesn't put us in a situation 10 years from now that's similar to the one we're in. So let me describe this amendment, which I believe will correct certain oversights of the bill. This amendment that I'm proposing adds both natural seepage and pollution resulting from the importation of oil from overseas to the list of possible focus areas for research that needs to be looked at among the list of priorities for research at the regional level. Let's note in California, natural seepage is a major problem. A major problem. And we need to have research into that to see what can be done and what we should be doing to confront that problem. As well as we need to make sure that we are fully aware of the risks when we don't develop our offshore oil and natural gas, which we haven't been. If we import more natural gas and oil from overseas, there are risks that come with that. And tankers are much more liable to have an accident than an offshore oil rig. One of the first things that I voted for, and I'm proud to say that I did vote for this, was requiring the double hulling of oil tankers. That was 20 years ago. And there was a big debate on that. It was a controversial issue, and I'll have to admit some people in my own party were putting pressure on me not to vote for double hulling. But that made sense. So our research, when it comes to trying to look at oil spills and such, we should be taking in seepage and transportation risks, and that's what my amendment provides, that we look at that as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rohrabacher. Despite your effort to try to make a bad argument for your amendment, it is a good amendment. And if there is no further discussion, all in favor say aye.
Mr. Chairman.
Aye. Opposed, no. Oh, excuse me. Mr. Hall? Okay.
Oh, I don't think I can improve on it nor do any damage to it. I'll yield back my time.
So once again, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. Fourth amendment on the roster is an amendment offered by the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Smith. Are you ready to proceed with your amendment?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment number 006, amendment offered by Mr. Lamar Smith of Texas to the amendment in the nature of a substitute.
I ask unanimous consent to dispense with the reading. Without objection, so ordered. I recognize the gentleman for 5 minutes to explain his amendment.
Mr. Chairman, this amendment requires the chairman of the Interagency Coordinating Committee to solicit advice and guidance in the development of the research plan from third-party standard-setting organizations on issues related to voluntary consensus standards, end quote. This is a common-sense way of facilitating more industry involvement in the process above and beyond any input from the Oil Pollution Research Advisory Committee. Industry is responsible for buying and commercializing the equipment being developed under this program. Furthermore, industry leaders have real-world operating experience and understand the effectiveness of different types of technologies. Accordingly, it makes sense to give industry some input during the development of the research plan. This amendment helps accomplish that goal, and I urge my colleagues to support it. Now yield back the balance of my time.
Mr. Smith, thank you for that excellent amendment. It makes a good bill better. Is there further discussion on the amendment? Mr. Hall is recognized.
Thank you. I support this amendment because it requires the Interagency Committee to seek advice from some of the outside experts who have been working for years in the field and have probably the best sense of what the best practices for industry have been and what they should be. Ultimately, industry is going to be responsible for commercializing and purchasing of the prevention and response technologies that will result from this research and development program. Their exclusion from the process in the underlying act has allowed for a huge disconnect to occur in the research to operations transitions. While there's no way to tell if this contributed to the lack of progress in technology and development and commercialization for so long, I think it's prudent to ensure that the folks that have the practical experience in dealing with these issues to weigh in on the development of the research and development of the plan. I urge my colleagues to support this amendment.
If there's no further comments on the amendment, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. No. The ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. The eighth amendment on the roster is an amendment offered by the gentleman from California also. Again, Mr. Rohrabacher, are you ready to proceed with your amendment?
Yes, I am. I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment number 008, amendment offered by Mr. Rohrabacher of California to the amendment in the nature of a substitute.
I ask unanimous consent to dispense with reading. Without objection, so ordered. I recognize the gentleman for 5 minutes to explain his amendment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. As I have previously mentioned, it is our responsibility in the Science Committee, and the responsibility of each of us individually to do everything we can to make certain that technologies are developed, tested, and implemented to protect people and the environment from real harm that is posed by oil discharges. This amendment does that by removing the specific directive that the EPA must perform the research rather than all the members of the Interagency Committee. It clarifies the language to direct the research to focus on the effects to human health and the environment rather than simply then toxicity, of the technologies developed. Let me just note that there's no reason that I think that just the EPA should just be doing research and giving us their benefit of their work. The Department of Interior, the Coast Guard, NOAA, all of them have something to contribute as well as the EPA. Yield back.
And is there further discussion on the amendment? Dr. Baird is recognized.
Mr. Rohrabacher, I think there are a number of points that are worthwhile in the amendment. I just want to understand something. I may need to confer with counsel. In removing this, the way, as I understand the way it's worded, EPA is taken out, but you're not saying, is it your intent to say EPA cannot do this research?
No, that is not my intention. My intention is to have other agencies and their capabilities brought into play rather than just excluding all of them and making it just the EPA.
So in other words, if NOAA wanted to a scientist at NOAA wanted
Correct.
to look at the toxicity or the other, I think your expansion of the definition is meritorious. If I may, Mr. Chairman, may I inquire of counsel if that is the actual effect of this? In other words, I don't want to inadvertently exclude EPA. I also see Dr. Bartlett has a comment he may want to offer there. But let me ask counsel, we're not excluding EPA from this by this language. We're just saying other agencies could do it as well versus exclusively EPA?
Yes, and the underlying ANS is not rather than the Interagency Coordinating Committee, but it does do a specific call out for EPA under the auspice of the Interagency Committee that has jurisdiction over this entire program.
When it gives a call out, does that de facto exclude? Does the existing language exclude other entities, or does it merely focus on EPA because of its known expertise in this?
That is correct.
Does not exclude.
It does not exclude the other agencies.
The existing language does not.
Exactly.
Basically what we are doing is clarifying the language to make sure that they know that these other agencies should be included in the research efforts rather than the possibility that they would think that it's just EPA.
I see the point. I support the intent, absolutely.
Let's just note that under the current law that none of them are specifically called out to do the research. So this certainly makes it clear that we would help think that they would be participating.
So EPA you don't have an opposition to EPA doing it. You just want to make sure the other entities. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. I'll yield back.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Bartlett is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to comment on the suggestion that we ought to be looking at the effects on human health rather than toxicity. Everything which is toxic does not have a negative effect on human health. The classic research of Hans Selye of half a century ago in Montreal, Canada, indicated that we are better off with low levels of stimulation. And I think it's very appropriate that you look at the effects on human health rather than toxicity. Almost everything in our environment is toxic if you elevate it to an appropriate level. So looking at toxicity is not the appropriate way to look at it. The effects on human health. And very few people understand, EPA among them, that low levels of stimulation are advantageous because they exercise your immune system and make you better capable of resisting real levels of threat. So I think it's very appropriate that we look at effects on human health rather than toxicity. Everything is toxic in enough concentration. So if you're simply looking at toxicity, you're going to put yourself in a little cocoon somewhere. Let's look at the effects on human health. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, just to clarify this, it does It does focus on human health, but it also does include the environmental effects. So we're not just focusing on human health; it would also be the effects on the environment. So, and I agree. And as usual, Dr. Bartlett has been very stimulative in his comments. But too much of a good thing, of course, could overwhelm us.
Is there further discussion on the amendment? Mr. Lujan.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Just a little clarification, Mr. Chairman. The amendment changes the language to development and testing from development and approval. And I was just curious as to what the impact of the change from testing and approval would result.
Well, approval has different standards than testing, so we would like the interagency committee to make sure that it can be involved with approving and testing of this type of research.
Mr. Chairman, does the net effect have, does it lower standards or does it increase standards then?
And you yield to Mr. Robacher to...
Excuse me, could you repeat the question?
If the impact of changing the level of standards from testing and approval, does the net effect of the amendment increase standards or lower standards?
Yeah. I don't think it has an impact on that.
Then, Mr. Chairman, then what's the need for the change from approval to testing?
We're making this basically aimed at research rather than regulation, and this emphasizes that we're talking about research rather than regulation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman?
I don't think we have authority for any regulation here
I know.
anyway. So, Ms. Woolsey.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think everybody remembers during the committee hearings that we heard from witnesses on the need to develop new responses and technologies that have minimum impact on our environment and human health and maximum effectiveness in responding to oil spills. That's clearly the basis for this legislation. So you have to know I oppose this amendment because the EPA is clearly the best agency equipped to analyze, monitor, and conduct research on the health and environmental effects of oil pollution technologies, and specifically chemical disbursements. It's their mandate as an agency. That doesn't mean that other research universities or other agencies won't also be working on it. There's nothing in this legislation that says only EPA can do this. But they've kind of, they need, pardon the expression, a focus. I was going to say a kick in the butt, but they need a focus. We need to tell them that this is, again, they have to focus on this. So I really urge my colleagues to oppose this amendment, and I yield back the, well, I would yield to Dr. Baird.
Thank you. The spirit of allowing, of encouraging broad spectrum research by the agencies makes a lot of sense. The fear I have, and I think that one of the historical trends seems to be, from our understanding, is that if sort of everybody's in charge, then nobody may be in charge. And traditionally, EPA has the most horsepower at its disposal and the most regulatory authority, though that's not our bailiwick, but it has the research horsepower to look at toxicity studies, probably more than most of the other agencies involved. And the fear is if we don't specifically call out EPA to do that, do we then sort of absolve them of the responsibility by so doing? So my question is, I think the gentleman's intent is right, but I don't want to have an unintended consequence. I'm wondering, I don't know. I'm wondering if there's a way.
If the gentleman will yield, I think the bottom line is this: that this is clearly not a mischievous or sort of a poison pill kind of amendment. It's an effort to try to move closer. I think that we would have to oppose the amendment as it is now, But if the gentleman would want to withdraw it, I think there's good faith on all sides to continue to work to move forward with that. And so I yield to Mr. Rohrabacher.
Well, let me just note, I think that you can sort of nitpick things to death sometimes, and it's clear that what we're trying to put forward here is a team effort by mobilizing the various research capabilities of the federal government, which are not just incorporated in the EPA, although we have at the same time and made sure that the EPA is still considered the lead sled dog in the whole effort. So I don't see what the problem is here. I'd be happy to let me consult with my leader here, my ranking member.
Gentleman yield.
Yes, I would.
I think while I admire Mrs. Woosley for upgrading the legislation that she launched some time ago in behalf of her own district, I differ with her on some of her statements just a few moments ago. I think EPA is the very worst entity to give any rights to, any additional rights, because I've gone through about 30 years here with them when they wouldn't give a decision, and when you don't give a decision, there's no appeal from it. It's caused us on a lot of bills where the EPA is involved in to place a provision in there that if they don't approve something within 30 days that it's approved. Otherwise, they wouldn't approve it. So the person asking for it may be a small businessman that wants some consideration for something that he's trying to bring to his district and has to wait until they decide to give him a no. You can't appeal from no action, and they rode that horse to the front line many, many times. I think any time you can set out and really relay what EPA has to say about it, you ought to do it, and I think that's what this bill does.
Mr. Rohrabacher still has time.
And I will.
So it does. Would you gentlemen like to have call for a vote?
Yes, I'll call for a vote.
Then if there's no further discussion, the vote is on the amendment. All in favor of the amendment, say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. No. The noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to. But let me say that that Mr. Rohrabacher in no way waives his right to continue to discuss this. It was a good faith amendment. The ninth amendment on the roster is an amendment offered by the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Diaz-Balart. Are you ready to proceed with?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment on the desk.
I have the clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment number 010, amendment offered by Mr. Diaz-Balart of Florida to the amendment in the nature of a substitute.
I ask unanimous consent to dispense with the reading. Without objection, so ordered. I recognize the gentleman for 5 minutes to explain the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The amendment in the nature of the substitute before us contains standards for the evaluation of oil pollution prevention technology. Now, this technology can also include dispersants, skimmers, booms, etc. Currently, the bill includes the evaluation of the environmental effects of these technologies, as it well needs to, as it well should. My amendment would just add a new standard to the evaluation. It adds that this program should also evaluate the performance and effectiveness of oil pollution prevention technologies in detecting, containing, recovering, etc., mitigating for the discharges. In other words, my amendment just says that we should evaluate the effectiveness of those technologies that are developed to get the oil out of the water or off the land or off the ice, etc. So I think it's a common sense amendment. I do want to, Mr. Chairman, also, while I still have the floor, also want to add to what Mr. Rohrabacher said. Mr. Beard has been exceedingly good to work with. He's one of those people that's serious, that he's thoughtful. So it's been a pleasure to work for him, and I just wanted to add those words as well. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You've also been serious and thoughtful, and I guess sensitive by virtue of being from Florida. And so if there are no further discussion, the vote occurs on the amendment. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. The 10th amendment on the roster is an amendment offered by the gentleman from New York, Mr. Tonko. Are you ready to proceed with your amendment?
Yes, Mr. Chair. I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment number 032, amendment offered by Mr. Tonko of New York to the amendment in the nature of a substitute.
I ask unanimous consent to dispense with the reading. Without objection, so ordered. I recognize the gentleman for 5 minutes to explain his amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We all know the very important role that small business plays in our economy. There are thousands of businesses which have developed or are developing technologies to solve various problems and societal challenges. Most of these technologies will be created outside of the research and development program area that is set up by this legislation. So therefore, it is important, I believe, that when we set up standards and protocols for oil technology evaluation, that we consider these small businesses that are outside the program as a part of the response. This amendment is a straightforward amendment that will make sure that small businesses are considered in the technology evaluation program. Including small businesses in the equation will not only help us find solutions to possible oil discharges, but will also give those businesses more opportunities, which will create then a stronger economic recovery for our small business community. I urge my colleagues to support this amendment, and, Mr. Chair, I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Mr. Tonko. We all know that small business is a major generator of jobs in this country, and we thank you for that amendment. Is there further discussion? If no, the vote occurs on the amendment. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed say no. The ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. The 11th amendment on the roster is an amendment offered by the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Lipinski. Dr. Lipinski, are you ready to proceed with your amendment?
Yes, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment number 072, amendment offered by Mr. Lipinski of Illinois to the amendment in the nature of a substitute.
I ask unanimous consent to dispense with reading. Without objection, so ordered. I recognize the gentleman for 5 minutes to explain the amendment.
Thank you, Chairman Gordon. I won't take 5 minutes. I'm very appreciative of the leadership that you have shown in response to the disaster in the Gulf. And I'd also like to commend the work of Ms. Woolsey and Dr. Barrett in crafting this bill. Now, Section 4 of the bill requires that the oil pollution research programs provide for the evaluation of prevention technologies. My amendment would simply add probabilistic research analysis to the list of techniques that can be used in these evaluations. From the perspective of a systems engineer, which I'm trained in, this is common sense. For those who are unfamiliar with the term a probabilistic risk analysis, or PRA, is a systematic and comprehensive methodology used to evaluate the risks associated with a complex engineered technological entity. To put it more simply, it looks at what can go wrong, what the consequences can be, and how likely they are to occur. It's an approach that was first used in the aerospace industry during the Apollo program, and it has since spread to other industries, notably the nuclear power industry. The pollution prevention control systems on an oil rig are a complex technological system, and this is the right tool for evaluating their potential problems. I urge my colleagues to support this amendment, and I yield back.
Thank you, Dr. Lipinski, for your good amendment. Is there further discussion on the amendment? If not, those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. The 12th amendment on the roster is an amendment offered by the gentleman from California. Mr. Gerarmandi, are you ready to proceed with your amendment?
I am. I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment number 011, amendment offered by Mr. Gerarmandi of California to the amendment in the nature of a substitute.
I ask unanimous consent to dispense with the reading. Without objection, so ordered. I recognize the gentleman for 5 minutes to explain the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to the authors of the bill, thank you for your good work. This would simply add a little piece to the research about where the oil is and what it is doing and where it is going. It would add a half a sentence that says, maybe we ought to understand how much there is. And so the specific language does just that. It says, including tools and models to accurately measure and predict the flow of oil that is discharged. We know that from the issue that arose in San Francisco Bay, the genesis of this bill, there was not good information at the outset on to how much oil would be there, and therefore the response was initially insufficient. We know from the Gulf oil spill that a similar issue of how much oil is being discharged has been an ongoing issue from day one and continues to this day. This would add to the research program a modeling program to understand and to be able to predict exactly how much oil is being discharged. I'd ask for support.
Is there further discussion on the amendment? Mr. Grayson is recognized.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I just want to say how important I think this particular amendment is, because we're in a situation now where oil companies have a built-in incentive to hide their spills because of the $4,000 a barrel fine for oil spills. And we've seen the effect of that recently with the BP oil spill itself, when there's been somewhere between 5,000 and 100,000 barrels of oil spilled into the Gulf each day. We don't know how much by a factor of 20. So this is research that's definitely much needed, and we'll have to make sure that in the future we have a better idea of what the extent of these spills really is. So I support this amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Garamendi. Again, this clearly is an amendment that makes a good bill better. So if there's no further discussion, then the vote occurs on the amendment. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, no. No. Nope, excuse me. No, the ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. Let's see. Now, the 13th amendment on the roster is an amendment offered by the gentlelady from Texas, Ms. Johnson. Are you ready to proceed with your amendment?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment number 122, amendment offered by Ms. Eddie Bernice Johnson of Texas to the amendment in the nature of a substitute.
I ask unanimous consent to dispense with the reading. Without objection, so ordered. I recognize the gentlelady for 5 minutes to explain the amendment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member, for considering my amendment. My amendment provides language to ensure economically disadvantaged communities are a strong focus in this legislation. My amendment is a simple reminder that groups that historically are hit hardest by environmental disasters are not forgotten. I feel strongly that the immediate concerns must be the livelihoods of families who have lost their income due to this spill. A number of these families are having trouble putting food on their tables. The disproportionate burden from the environmental disasters on communities of color, low-income people, and indigenous communities also need to be reduced as well. These communities are experiencing the highest rates of morbidity and/or death from asthma, cancer, learning disabilities, lead poisoning, lupus, and several other diseases. It is my hope that my amendment will bring attention to the disproportionate burden of pollution on the most vulnerable members of our society. Those along the coast who are elderly, children, or have existing health conditions, especially respiratory diseases, are at the highest risk for adverse health impacts from this spill. A clear understanding, however, is missing about what the short and long-term health impacts will be. When considering research on the effects of the spill, we must not forget those who are hurting the most. This is the intent of my amendment, and I encourage my colleagues to support it. Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member, I appreciate your consideration of this straightforward amendment and yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson, for that good amendment. Is there further discussion? If not, the vote occurs on the amendment. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. The 14th amendment on the roster is an amendment offered by the gentlelady from Pennsylvania. Ms. Dalkemper, are you ready to proceed with your amendment?
Yes, I am, Mr. Chairman. I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment number 045, amendment offered by Mrs. Dahlkemper of Pennsylvania and Mr. Grayson of Florida to the amendment in the nature of a substitute.
I ask unanimous consent to dispense with the reading. Without objection, so ordered. I recognize the gentlelady for 5 minutes to explain her amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Ranking Member Hall. I'm speaking today in support of my amendment along with Mr. Grayson. As you know, we've only begun to assess the damage of the BP oil spill in the Gulf Coast, damage to the environment, to the economy, and to our people. As we meet here today, hundreds of brave men and women, including my daughter, who's in the Coast Guard, are in the Gulf Coast working to save our waters, beaches, and the Gulf economy. Most of them have no idea what chemicals and pollutants they are being exposed to in the air while they work to clean the beaches and the water. My amendment would direct research programs to monitor both the onshore and offshore air quality in these spill areas and ensure that this information is readily available to our emergency responders, to scientists, and most significantly to local residents. I urge all to support my amendment to protect these dedicated to cleaning up oil spills like the one in the Gulf Coast. And thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back the remainder of my time.
Thank you, and many thanks to your daughter for the good work that she's doing.
I'm very proud of her.
Well, you should be. Is there further discussion on the amendment? If no, the vote occurs on the amendment. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. The 15th amendment on the roster is an amendment offered by the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Grayson. Are you ready to proceed with your amendment?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment number 078, amendment offered by Mr. Grayson of Florida to the amendment in the nature of a substitute.
I ask unanimous consent to dispense with reading. Without objection, so ordered. I recognize the gentleman for 5 minutes to explain his amendment.
Mr. Chairman, the fundamental purpose of this amendment is to extend and expand research on the effects of these spills on the human beings who are assigned to clean them up. It's interesting that after a century of exposure to hydrocarbons and intensive use of hydrocarbons throughout our economy to generate energy, to provide transportation, and so on, we still don't know what is the effect of the exposure of these of hydrocarbons to human beings in the context of a cleanup like this. Recently, some people who were involved in the cleanup of the spill in the Gulf were instructed not to wear respirators because that might imply that they needed them. And it's odd that at this point there is some doubt or even an open question about whether that's the case or not. We've had many, many anecdotal reports at this point of people who are doing this kind of work who have been exposed to these fumes and to these toxic elements, and as a result of that have already gotten sick. We need to know with some specificity what the actual effect of the spill is on the people who were assigned to clean it up, and that's exactly what this amendment proposes to determine. Therefore, I offer the amendment, and I urge my colleagues to support it. Thank you. I yield the rest of my time.
Is there further discussion on the amendment? If not, the vote is called on the amendment. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. 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 All opposed say no. The ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. The 16th amendment on the roster is an amendment offered by the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Hall. Are you ready to proceed with your amendment?
I have an amendment at the desk, Mr. Chairman.
I ask unanimous consent to dispense with the reading. Without objection, so ordered. I recognize the gentleman for 5 minutes to explain the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Oil Pollution Act of 1990 authorized the operation of the Oil and Hazardous Materials Simulated Environmental Test Tank, pronounced OMSAT, as the official facility to test and evaluate all oil pollution technologies. Since it's been impossible for government agencies to conduct controlled field testing due to a complex maze of bureaucratic red tape, OMSAT is the only facility the U.S. has to evaluate the performance of cleanup technology. The only other options are to test them in other nations, but their testing procedures are different from ours. During the Energy and Environmental Subcommittee hearing on oil spill research and development, the witness from the Minerals Management Service stated that the OMSAT is critical to oil spill response technology development in the United States. It plays an essential role in developing the most effective response technologies as well as preparing responders with the most realistic training available before an actual spill. Despite being so critical to U.S. development of oil spill response technology, this facility has been redesignated as a National Oil Spill Response and Renewable Energy Test Facility. This committee has been supportive of a wide range of renewable energy technology and has authorized an enormous amount of resources for them. OMSAT is the only place where oil spill technologies can be tested and then approved by Interior to be used during response incidences. It's vital that this single resource preserves its primary focus, which is the testing and evaluation of technologies that clean up oil discharges. These technologies should not have to compete for resources with renewable technologies. My amendment would, in no uncertain terms, state that oil pollution technology testing and evaluation should be given priority over all other activities this facility is now used for. Diverting resources to test renewables will not help us clean up oil spills more effectively and could even become a detriment practice of the approval of cleanup technologies is delayed in favor of renewable testing. I urge my colleagues to support this amendment. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Hall, for the good amendment. Is there further discussion? If not, the vote occurs on the amendment. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. The 20th amendment on the roster is an amendment offered by the gentleman from Georgia, Dr. Brown. At the risk of making a dangerous motion, I'm going to ask unanimous consent that we oh, is there not? Oh, okay. My order. Excuse me. Okay. And I appreciate being corrected. We're now on the 17th Amendment, and with Dr. Brown being noticed that he is 20. The 17th Amendment on the roster is an amendment offered by the gentlelady from Texas. Ms. Johnson, are you ready to proceed with your amendment?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment number 121, amendment offered by Ms. Eddie Bernice Johnson of Texas to the amendment in the nature of a substitute.
I ask unanimous consent to dispense with the reading. Without objection, so ordered. I recognize the gentlelady for 5 minutes to explain the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member, for considering this amendment. My amendment is pretty straightforward. It clarifies that competitive grants awarded through the Regional Research Program shall award grants competitively to universities or other research institutions, including minority-serving institutions. This language is basic. As you know, the bill authorizes grants to institutions of higher education and research centers to improve technologies used to prevent, combat, and clean up oil pollution. Research at these centers will indeed advance the nation's ability to prevent future oil spills and create groundbreaking technology to mitigate future disasters. These institutional grants will authorize research, development, and technology transfer activities. My amendment encouraged partnerships with minority-serving institutions. We want to be sure to award grants to the best institutions of higher education and research centers to improve partnerships so federal agencies can do their work even better. At the same time, we want to give the minority-serving institutions a realistic chance to participate in the research. As you know, that the majority of students at the majority of the minority-serving institutions study at small two-year institutions. These students could come to the larger universities to engage in research and gain some important career experience. Undergraduate research experience is key to getting admission to a graduate degree program. So the more we encourage partnerships with the minority-serving institutions in these activities, the more diverse the workforce we cultivate for oil spill research. To me, this creates a win-win situation. I want to say, Mr. Chairman, that in the structure of this amendment, the intent was for it to be handled with regional institutions and not nationwide. And I think there might be some confusion in the language, and if that is the case, I certainly would like to make sure it's corrected so it be clearly understood. I appreciate you considering this amendment, and I encourage the support of it. I yield back to balance my time.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson, for your good amendment. Is there further discussion?
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Hall's recognized.
I certainly support this amendment offered by Ms. Johnson. I urge the passage of the amendment. Yield back my very valuable time.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. And also, I want to thank all the members that are here. I know this is, we had a lot of good ideas that came in toward the last, and we're making that good bill better, and I thank you for hanging in there as we try to proceed with this. If there's no further discussion, then all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. The 18th amendment on the roster is an amendment offered by the gentleman from Washington, Dr. Baird. Are you ready to proceed with your amendment?
I am. I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment number 048, amendment offered by Mr. Baird of Washington to the amendment in the nature of a substitute.
I ask unanimous consent to dispense with the reading. Without objection, so ordered. I recognize the gentleman for 5 minutes to explain his amendment.
Mr. Chairman, this is a common sense amendment. Insofar as oil spills transcend national and international borders, and the expertise and knowledge for dealing with oil spills does as well. And it also, that expertise is also not limited to governmental entities. Basically, what this does is strengthen and expand the emphasis on international collaboration in two ways. It encourages domestic and foreign private actors, not just governmental and research entities, and it also encourages the leveraging of private and public capital, because there's a lot of, as we've discussed today and in our hearings, there is a lot of private expertise and knowledge and funding to conduct the research and develop the technologies we need, and that's the focus of the amendment. Urge passage.
Thank you, Dr. Baird, for the good amendment. Is there further discussion? Ms. Biggert is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have a question about this. I certainly agree that need to work with foreign countries But does this go too far when we start talking about cleanup standards with foreign governments? And does that mean that, those standards might be adopted and then the U.S. is not setting its own standards, but really having an international standard? We've had this problem with the financial services. We've had other areas where the adoption of standards might not be in our best interest.
And I assume you yield to Dr. Baird.
Dr. Baird.
It's an interesting question. I mean, the shoe can easily be on the other foot. If there are spills in other national waters, they could say, well, we're cleaning it up. I mean, the goal is not, I think, I respect the gentlelady's point. The goal is certainly not to tie us. I mean, there's no treaty ratification function here, but if there are international standards to be proposed, we ought to have a voice in that, I would think. I think it's in our best interest to have a voice in that, and that's the intent there. It's not in any way to say we're going to get ourselves. This amendment certainly has no authority to tie us, but nor does this committee have the jurisdiction that would do that.
Well, I guess it just, because it requires, it's almost like their function is going to get together and these standards, or are we going to try and impose our standards on them? When we have getting towards a treaty, I think would be a problem. Maybe just the way it's stated, but
right, I'm trying. It's funny. I respect the gentlelady's concern. I'm trying to see where the language evokes that. So I want to be respectful of that and understand it.
Would the gentleman?
But remember, we're talking controlled field tests of oil discharges. Oh, go ahead.
But, is the gentleman saying very explicitly that he's not trying to set up any kind of international standards?
Exactly.
Or require our country to be a part of any kind of international standards?
That is certainly not the intent. The intent would be, though, however, let's suppose someone sets, some international body were to say you set a standard at one part per trillion or something. Well, if you don't have technologies that you may need to test the applicability of that standard, would be the point. In other words, it's a research activity related to potential standards, but not in any way to try to promulgate standards. This is not designed to promulgate standards.
So would it be fair to say that if someone tried to create a standard, that this would give the United States the opportunity to test it and say, that's not a good standard, it won't even work?
That's the premise, yeah. Okay. If standards becomes an issue. But
Mr. Chairman.
that's our intent, but I understand.
Reclaiming my time.
Yeah.
Ms. Biggers, excuse me.
Maybe, well, there's a couple of things. Shall engage, which means you have to engage in international cooperation by harnessing global expertise, et cetera. And you have to and you're going to leverage public and private capital. And then you're going to, I lost it here, just the cleanup standards, maybe just taking that out. Take out cleanup standards.
Would the gentlelady yield?
Or standards,
for a
just standards.
suggestion?
You can have cleanup, but not standards.
Would the gentlelady yield
Yes,
for
I
a
yield to you,
suggestion?
Mr. Rohrbach.
Whereas I used to have lots of discussions about specific words that go in places, having been a speechwriter for President Reagan for 7 years, might I suggest instead of standards that you say procedures? Yield back.
The gentlelady yield.
Well, I think.
Pardon me. I'm trying to evaluate the impacts of that in terms of the underlying base bill. So that's where it's taken me a bit of time.
Okay, then
Why don't we? So as he is doing that, I think.
I'll yield to the gentleman from California.
The gentleman from California, Mr. Bilbrey, is recognized.
Thank you. I strongly support the amendment. I think that the proposed wording change kind of fits into it. And let me point out, I think one of the things that we can point at the United States not cooperating in international strategies on one item, We didn't cooperate in the development of technologies and techniques and research in cleanup. Good example was, there was a great opportunity and continues to be a great opportunity in the Niger Delta. The largest oil spills in the world have not even been talked about. We talk about it because it's on our backyard, but because it's out of sight and out of mind, we've got major oil problems in West Africa that have basically not been addressed by the Western countries very much. That would be a perfect test platform to go in there and try those technologies, try everything from remediation, biological remediation, or if you wanted to talk about the centrifuge system that Kevin Costner brought up. All of those technologies and all those techniques could have been developed, could have been refined, could have been proven in an area that basically has been ignored for too long. And I think this motion fits into that capability of cooperation around the world will help us develop technologies and techniques and procedures that can defend our own shorelines. And I think this is being proactive, and I strongly support it. I think the gentleman's recommendation is compatible with that goal of not so much setting standards, but actually setting procedures and minimum standards for operation rather than regulatory control. I think we want to find answers, not blame here, even though the gentleman from California did throw in that evil empire every once in a while. I think that overall he's pretty good with words. Yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Is there further discussion on the discussion?
Mr. Chairman.
I was just wondering if Mr. Barrett is ready to.
I think you'll let us know when he's ready.
Okay.
Mr. Robacher.
Yes. Let me just note that, well, first of all, it seems a little bit of a disconnect here that we were kind of opposing my effort to promote cooperation among government agencies and our own government. And now we have an amendment that's proposing that we have cooperation on a global scale with other governments. And so there's a little bit of a disconnect between what I had proposed earlier and the opposition to that, and now a proposal that is going way beyond that scope and going internationally. I support international cooperation. I support international cooperation to develop new technologies, as I think we all should, and procedures. What are the procedures that are used that permit companies and other entities to do the very best job? What are those things that work? Yes, we should be doing it. We should not be, however, cooperating on trying to develop our standards here, our legal regulatory standards, so that we will in some way be harmonizing with China, which may have no standards or very low standards, or some other country that may have higher standards, which would negate any type of development. So that word actually opens up a Pandora's box here, and I would suggest that you look. Just that one word change would alleviate these problems. And yield back my time.
Mr. Chairman.
I think Mr. Baird's recognized now.
I think the points are well taken. It's certainly not the intent to get us into the kind of dilemmas that you've described, but I can see the concern about that. And the last thing we would want to do is, that I would want to, is certainly not the intent here. So, but I do want to, at some point, and this may not be the best place to do it, I think there is a need for some international standard setting, not the least common denominator kind of standard setting. And so my question is, I don't want to remove this remember, this is what I'm trying to get at is there a way to clarify? We have no authority in this committee to mandate the nature of standards or the approval of a treaty or anything of that sort. We just don't have that authority. But it does make sense that our research entities would, it makes sense to me that our research entities would participate if there is and direct research relevant to those standards. And I'm not opposed to that.
Let me yield for a question.
Please.
Do you really want to direct our various government agencies and people on these task forces that we're setting up to get together with foreign entities and discuss the standards, or do you want them to discuss the technologies that we can work together and develop, and the methodologies that can be used to prevent oil spills and to help in cleanup operations? Or do you want them to be discussing legalities and
my intent would
and
be
standards?
would be the former, but I need to concur with folks.
Will the gentleman yield?
Surely.
I think there's one other issue by the use of the word standards, and I'm afraid that this might put the jurisdiction of this bill into energy and commerce.
If I might interject here, since it appears that most folks are on the same page in terms of the objective, and that Mr. Baird has said that it's not an effort to set standards, that we would accept that amendment and get this thesaurus out between now and the floor, and see if we can come up with a better word.
Mr. Chairman, I'm wondering if it'd be in order, possibly, while we confer on this, to move to the next amendment. Table this for one moment while I can discuss with counsel the implications of making this change, and then resume this in just a moment. I don't know if that's in order or not, and I don't know if the subsequent amendment would affect this.
Well, then, by unanimous consent, I will suggest that we move on to amendment number 19. Ms. Biggert objects, so we'll just wait a while.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Hall's
Like
recognized.
the last word. I support Mrs. Biggert's change, and I'm concerned that the word standards is going to create a number of problems. For weeks it had been mentioned that the use of the word standards in the section dealing with international cooperation was not something many of us could support. We've talked about that before. Language was offered that would have tamped down the language in the ANS while at the same time preserving the original intent of the law. But this amendment really moves in the complete opposite direction and has only served to magnify the concerns that a lot of us on this side have. It expands the focus of the research program from coordinate and cooperate in conducting this research in the existing law to engaging in international cooperation by harnessing global expertise. Remember, I've had operation on my eyes. This requirement, though, continuously interacts with these international entities named in the amendment and could divert attention. The development of the word development standard is a very lengthy and highly technical process, and it's also a process that each nation does for itself. And we've joined many international treaties to attempt to align some of these standards. Sometimes these treaty negotiations take decades. Again, the direction of the program will be diverted from the main purpose of the existing law. The focus of international cooperation should remain on the research, development, and demonstration activities, including those addressing oil containment, recovery, and control field test of oil discharges. So I think this amendment presents a pretty significant challenge.
Would the gentleman yield?
I think Dr. Baird is correct in suggesting a timeout and see what they can work out.
Would the gentleman yield?
I do yield.
I would like to just read the language, and this is how it concludes. Oil pollution, research, development, and demonstration activities, including controlled field tests of oil discharges, oil recovery, and cleanup standards. What this sounds to me like is saying, if there are some standards, if there are oil recovery, that we need to have the equipment here in this country
Mr. Chairman,
to test them.
Mr. Chairman, if I
Okay, sure.
your permission, I think
I yield.
start-
Well, Mr. Hall controls time.
Mr. Hall, would Mr. Hall yield?
I yield to Mr.
I would just note that you started a little bit too late in your analysis of what that sentence really meant, or how to determine what it will mean if we leave it the same language. You have to start up with towards innovative models that can be instituted to conduct or cleanup standards. I mean, that's very clear what you're looking for then. There's these other things in between there, but you're talking about people getting together and discussing innovative models that can be instituted to conduct cleanup standards. And we just asked Mr. Baird whether his intent was to have people coming together to talk about standards or talk about technologies and procedures. And he made it very clear his intent for is international cooperation for that, and not to come up with innovative models for standards. So,
Yield, I think it's not to come up with models for standards, come up with models to test if there are standards. But I yield to...
Or innovative models that can be instituted to conduct, not...
Yeah,
Let's see. Okay.
Chairman,
Well, if Mr. Hall has the time now, and Mr. Hall, do you want to yield to Mr. Baird?
I believe you want me to. I do yield to Dr. Baird, and I'm pleased to.
I appreciate that. My original intent was much more in line with the chairman's description, was that the research could look at the standards. If standards were proposed, the research would look at how those standards function, not research. My focus was not to say let's all get together and promulgate standards. That was not my intent with the underlying text, So personally, I'm amenable to taking I'm amenable to changing standards to methodologies, so we can move forward. Or now, Mr. Bilbray had a good suggestion, and it was, but I don't know. I'm going to ask counsel on this. One of the things our witnesses pointed out was, if you're going to, so everybody descends on the Gulf and says, or whatever the location of the spill is, and says, I'm going to clean up this material. But by what criteria do we evaluate, and Mr. Bilbray came up with the word criteria, by what criteria do we evaluate efficacy of cleanup? Now, what I don't know is criteria carry with it the legalese baggage that standards may. If it doesn't, criteria may be a happy resolution to this.
Will the gentleman yield?
I'd be happy to.
I would prefer procedures rather than criteria, but.
Here's a question. A procedure
or
is
methodology.
Or methodology.
Yeah, the only question is some of our witnesses had suggested that a methodology might be skimming is a generic methodology. But by what criteria do we evaluate the efficacy of the skimming? And so the point was we may need to come up with some ways to look at, and that's a research question. How do we evaluate the efficacy of a methodology? And hence that was the purpose here, was not a legalese.
Well, let me make a suggestion. Since we're on the 18th Amendment, we have a few more to go. I think where we are is that if either we can do one or two things. If Dr. Baird has a word that he is comfortable with, we will take unanimous consent and see whether we get that to change that word. Otherwise, we'll vote on the underlying amendment and, I say, get the thesaurus out at a later date.
Mr. Chairman, I would suggest that if Dr. Baird would consider that, putting the change of the word in so that we could then move this through, and if he wants to try to change it later on.
What if we do this? What if we add, and I think the suggestion has been most helpful, what if we say methodologies and criteria for evaluation?
I ask unanimous consent that the language just spoken by Mr. Baird is used to replace the existing languages. Does Ms. Baird, Ms. Biggert object? Then if Mrs. Biggert objects, the unanimous consent is not granted. And without further discussion, then the motion is on Mr. Baird's amendment. All in favor of Mr. Baird's amendment, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it. The amendment is passed, but the discussion does not stop.
I would hope that would happen. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The 19th Amendment on the roster is an amendment offered coincidentally by Ms. Biggert. Are you ready to proceed with your amendment?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Maybe I should have done that first. I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment number 002, amendment offered by Mrs. Biggert of Illinois to the amendment in the nature of a substitute.
I ask unanimous consent to dispense with the reading. Without objection, so ordered. I recognize the gentlelady for 5 minutes to explain her amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I thank Chairman Baird for all the work that he's done on this. And I did have the opportunity to go down to the Gulf and was there this past Friday and toured by helicopter and the Coast Guard out to Grand Isle. And it was a very interesting trip. This is, I think, day 87, I think, that we're looking at now, and there certainly is so many things that are not resolved. Going out there and meeting with the locals, the mayor and all of the other locals in that area was very revealing. And what bothered me the most was the federal government and the slowness of the cleanup and of finding. Well, of course, BP is working on actually the actual rig, but the slowness. For example, one of the gentlemen said that I guess it takes a celebrity to get the skimmers out there rather than just allowing it to happen, and EPA working very fast with the studies that they're making. But, as the whaler was delayed and they wouldn't, I guess it actually didn't work after that. But the slowness, particularly of the EPA, and the frustration that the locals, because they had a lot of solutions. I mean, they live there. For example, trying to close off the inlets in the Grand Isle, they want to put in rocks, which they think will really hold back the oil from the estuaries and from the wetlands. And this has been delayed. And as I said, this is now day 87, and the oil is moving into so many of these places. So, and it seems like there's no. I don't want to use the word czar, but there's nobody really in charge, I think, that is really moving this forward. And so I think this is a really good bill. We have the Interagency Council. My amendment then is really to amend the annual report section of the underlying bill to require more detailed information from the Interagency Committee, require the Interagency Committee to report to Congress on proposed research changes, which would come from the National Academies of Science. We want to make sure, we're the Science Committee, that this really is science-based, and have them have the opportunity to look at research too. So I believe it's important to focus our research efforts and show progress in areas where new solutions are most needed. We obviously were caught without having the ability to bring in so many research. I had somebody in my district call me, and they have a fabric that sops up oil, to try and get anybody to listen, and you put your name in and then you don't hear from anybody. I mean, there's so much innovation that we really have that hasn't been used. So I think that this, with more detailed information disclosed to Congress, we can hold our agencies accountable and expedite possible solutions for mitigation or containment. And I think we need to work to prevent the future unknown scenarios like those encountered in the wake of this recent oil spill. And so my amendment, I think, will help us do just that. And I would yield back.
Mr. Hall is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, anytime you can work on the annual reporting requirements and make them better, I think it's something good that this committee ought to consider. This amendment would ensure more detailed information about projects that agencies are funding, what technological advancements have resulted, and what's planned for a coming year. The amendment also includes a mechanism to ensure that any recommendations made by the National Academies of Science after their review of the research and development plan are reported to Congress with reason why they were or were not incorporated into the Interagency Committee's plan. I think these changes will help this committee conduct our oversight responsibility over the programs in the future. Urge support of this language.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. Thank you, Mr. Hall. And Ms. Biggert, despite your earlier comments, this is a good amendment, and I suggest that we take it. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed, no. The amendment passes. And again, I thank the committee for their patience, and to let you know, we are down to our last two amendments, and Dr. Brown, you're recognized for amendment number 20.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment number 009, amendment offered by Mr. Brown of Georgia to the amendment in the nature of a substitute.
I ask unanimous consent to dispense with reading. Without objection, so ordered. I recognize the gentleman for 5 minutes to explain his amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My amendment is simple and straightforward. It is simply establishes a criteria to be used in the selection of the appointments to the Oil Pollution Research Advisory Committee. It states that the advisory committee shall be composed of, quote, individuals with extensive knowledge and research experience or operational knowledge of prevention, detection, response, containment, and mitigation of oil discharges, unquote. It adds that, quote, individuals broadly representative of stakeholders affected by oil discharges, unquote, be included on the advisory committee. The Oil Pollution Research Advisory Committee will play an important role and needs to be comprised of individuals who have the technical experience and the knowledge in this area. We've all witnessed numerous commissions and committees in the past that have been effective, and those that have been a waste of time and resources. Those committees that have been most effective and most credible are those that have utilized the experience, talent, and knowledge from experts in those particular areas. I hope that my colleagues will support this non-controversial amendment. And, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Dr. Brown, and it's a pleasure to support a Brown amendment. And is there further discussion on the amendment?
Wonder of wonders.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry.
I just would echo, I think it's a good amendment. I think it's a needed piece, and we certainly heard from our testimony that the collaboration is needed and support.
If there's no further discussion, the vote occurs on the amendment. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it. And we'll see if Dr. Brown can do 2 for 2 here as he brings up the 21st Amendment. Oh, is it? Dr. Baird is closing. Okay. Dr. Baird, excuse me.
Mr. Chairman, I'll loan you my glasses.
Yeah. Thank you. All right. Now we're on the 21st Amendment, the roster, and offered by the gentleman from Washington, Dr. Baird. Are you ready to proceed with your
amendment? I have an amendment at the desk. I'm ready to proceed.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment number 049, amendment offered by Mr. Baird of Washington to the amendment in the nature of a substitute.
I ask unanimous consent to dispense with reading. Without objection, so ordered. I recognize the gentleman for 5 minutes to explain the amendment.
Mr. Chairman, during our visit to the Gulf, we met with a number of people and asked, several occasions, asked questions about what was happening down there. And in a couple of instances, were apprised that there were research activities ongoing, but that the incident commander was unable, or people along the chain of command were unable to access information from that research. And to me, it seems that if you've got a national disaster of this magnitude, it needs to be an all-hands-on-deck kind of situation. And if you've got someone receiving federal money to conduct research in the region of a disaster, and their research methodologies or findings could be relevant to how you respond to that disaster, we ought to have a mechanism whereby the incident commander can get access to that information so they can use it in making the most effective response. As an academic, I recognize, and as a researcher, I recognize that one wants to be mindful of respecting proprietary interests for publication, et cetera, but this bill does that. It provides, or this amendment does that. It provides the mechanism whereby information would be accessible, but proprietary and not yet public information would be preserved. And certainly the people we spoke to in the region seemed to think this would be a very useful mechanism, because they had found instances where they knew of data that would be helpful to them, but they were unable to get that data in a timely manner. And it seems to me, if you're a researcher getting taxpayer dollars to conduct your research, and the information you're obtaining is needed to help respond to a disaster like this, you ought to voluntarily try to provide it. But if you're reluctant to do that, we ought to have a mechanism whereby it can, there can be some insistence that that be provided. And with that, I yield back.
Is there further discussion on the amendment?
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Hall, recognized.
I thank you, Mr. Chairman. I certainly support the concept this bill is based on, but I have a concern. The amendment is drafted in such a way that it would make the scope of its reach what I'd contend is enormous. It would apply to every single entity that receives federal funding for research, public or private, to make their research available to the interagency committee and on-scene coordinator upon request. This would require the interagency committee or the on-scene coordinator to know that such research exists. At one time, there was something called the Radius Database, Research and Development in the United States. This database contained the description and funding of levels of every research project funded by the federal government and gave access to interested users. Ironically, the largest set of this users was from other countries. The funding for the database has lapsed and it no longer exists. Without such a tool, how would the interagency committee or on-scene coordinator know what usable research was out there? I may have missed something in it. I don't want to do that. I like the intent of it. The intent of the amendment is a good one, to get the available research to the people that need it the most, no matter where it originates. I'm just not so sure how it's going to be implemented.
Would the gentleman yield?
Yes, sure do.
And maybe I'm missing something. I don't believe there's anything in the bill that mandates that the incident coordinator have such a database of everything that's going on. If it's there, I missed it and certainly didn't intend to put it there. But what we became aware of is incident commanders or someone up of a fairly high level being aware that research was being conducted. Let me give you an example. Let's suppose there's a researcher conducting a study of oxygen levels in the water system, and they've got gliders or some other mechanism gathering data. And the incident commander says, well, what is the effect of the dispersants or the oil or something else on oxygenation levels? Now, that's an important question because it might relate to whether or not you open fisheries or not, et cetera. There are consequential decisions to be made. And someone says, well, we've got a researcher in the field doing that study right now. Why don't we call them and ask them what they're finding? And that researcher says, I'm not going to share my findings with you. And they're stymied. So there's no mandate here in this section in my amendment that the incident commander know all of these kind of things. And I'm not sure where that concern is being derived. So maybe the gentleman can enlighten me about that.
Gentleman yield.
Yeah, it's your time. I'm happy to. Yeah.
Out there on line 9 of the amendment here, it says, shall, upon request, make the methodologies or research results of such research available. How would they know? How could they possibly know if there's not some implementation or some way that it's implemented where they have access to it, but what's available to let them know that they would even make such a request?
Well, it sounds to me like you're adding something to my amendment that doesn't exist and then proposing to defeat the amendment on grounds of something that's not there to begin with.
No, I'm not trying to do that. I'm trying to help you.
There's nothing in there that does it, though.
If Mr. Hall would, would yield, I think the question is, how would they know? Well, someone might have gotten a National Science Foundation grant. Somebody might have gotten a research grant through some university. That was public knowledge that they knew that there was a grant given to someone to research a particular area. So as Mr. Hall said, as Dr. Baird said, he's not advocating that there be an inventory, but if there is, again, a common knowledge, public knowledge that research is going on somewhere, that they should have access to it.
Yeah, I'm not.
Would that be fair?
Indeed, Mr. Chairman. I'm not suggesting, there's nothing in here mandating that the incident commander or anyone else know this is being done. It is simply saying if you are aware that it is being done, you can access. It's a fairly small community of researchers, first of all, that does this kind of research. The incident commander's got to have the broad sweep of the field of play at his or her disposal, so they know if there's a ship out there doing something, they know it's there. If there's a glider out there under the water, they got to know that's in the terrain. So they should, if they do find out about that, they ought to be able to say to folks, hey, what are you finding?
Will the gentleman yield?
I'd be happy to.
Does,
I don't know
I
who
think it's
owns
Mr.
time.
Hall's time, and I'm sure he'll yield to you.
I'll yield to Ms.
Thank you.
Bigger.
Is what you're saying, let's say the researcher does not want to give the information, it's proprietary, he's working on it, doesn't want somebody, to put all the pieces together. Would he have to disclose how it works?
To the incident commander. And there's, if you look, it's a very good question. And if the last lines, Ms. Biggert, in response activity in the event of an oil discharge.
What page are you on?
On the second page of the proposed amendment. Shall not be included in information made publicly available pursuant to this act. So in other words, we're not saying you have to publicize this. In fact, we're specifically not requiring publication. And from line 14, except to the extent that the information is protected from disclosure of Title IX. So there are some information that can be protected, but what we're trying to say, we're not saying, Mr. or Ms. Incident Commander, you can just gather all the data and put it up on a web and let anybody look at it that you want. But if you've got data that might be helpful, I want to be able to at least have you tell me what you're finding. And imagine the frustration of an incident commander who says, there's a researcher in the field. Let me put it this way. From the perspective of the researcher, their paramount importance may be getting that publication, and I respect and understand that. From the perspective of the American taxpayer, their paramount interest is not in that researcher's publication, it is in cleaning up and containing these spills in the most efficacious way possible.
Will the gentleman yield?
Sure.
You already have kind of a situation that concerns me. There is a company that has, with the dispersal, and the EPA really wants everything, what's in there and everything, and it's very hard for a company then to protect something that is a proprietary product.
Remember, this only applies to entities receiving federal funding for research. So if the company's got proprietary chemical substance and they're doing their own research, this does not intrude upon them.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Grayson's recognized.
I yield back. That was the point that I wanted to make. The fact that what we're doing here is simply informing the left hand what the right hand is doing. This amendment is limited to federal funding and specifically the research results that come out of federally funded research. Why would we not want to know what one federal grantee is doing when another federal grantee needs to know? That's the point that I wanted to make, and Dr. Baird just made it.
If there's no further discussion on the 21st and last amendment, then we will.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Hall is recognized.
Doesn't this amendment contend that there might be unusual research that could be helpful? And isn't there some way that, or is this such a select group that would have access or interest in such, that they would have something that keyed it to let them know that it was here? And, it's not impossible maybe to fix this in report language. Maybe that's the answer to it. But it seems that there ought to be some way that we could connect it to the oil cleanup, what if NIH or DOD had something that would not necessarily be connected to the oil cleanup?
Mr. Chairman?
But could be helpful otherwise. And any of that, if we can work on report language, it might. I just don't see how it's implemented where people that really need it the most wouldn't have any information on it, wouldn't know it was there.
And Mr. Hall yields to Mr.
Yes, I yield, Dr.
The challenge we face, and I respect very what I think, if I understand what Mr. Hall was saying, one would assume, as Mr. Grayson said, that the left hand ought to tell the right hand what it's doing. I've personally, in this Congress, had the experience of seeking data and methodologies from a federally funded research study, the purported results of which were used to influence policy and quoted on the floor of the House. And when I wanted to get access to the data and the methodologies to understand that, they were denied. Taxpayer-funded research. And we just talked a few weeks ago, staff members and I, 2 members, two people involved in the cleanup, and they frankly were reticent to even acknowledge that. I said, well, what's the status? What do you know about this data? And they said, well, someone's gathering data on that right now. And I said something to the effect of, well, what are they learning? And they said, they won't tell us. Now,
And Dr. Baird, this is only activated in an emergency situation.
it's only activated in emergency. So any entity, but look, in the event of an oil discharge incident described in sections, so it's got to be an oil discharge. So it's got to be this emergency kind of oil discharge situation. The reason it's got to be relative, which may be useful for response activity. So it's got to be an oil discharge situation. The reason for requesting the information has to be relevant to the response activities. In other words, you can't just say, we're going to just ask for everything under this.
And Dr. Baird, I assume that you are receptive to talking with Mr. Hall about report language if, to be...
Yeah, the problem with the report language is,
Okay.
I'm happy to talk about report language to clarify the intent of this, but I think it has to have statutory authority. And the reason is, people will say, I appreciate your report language. You can't make me do nothing.
Oh, no, we're not trying to substitute.
Okay, yeah, okay.
I'd rather say if there was report language.
Yeah, right.
So if there's no further discussion, then the motion is on the amendment. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed, no. The ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. And if there are no other amendments, then the vote occurs on the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 2693 as amended. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. The ayes have it. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The vote is now on the bill.
Mr. Chairman,
Give me the amendment is agreed to. Yes.
are we past any time for debate on the general bill then? Yep. We have? Okay.
According to our parliamentarian, Mr. Sensenbrenner, we are. The vote is now on the bill, H.R. 2693 as amended. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. The ayes, in the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. I now recognize Dr. Baird for a motion.
Mr. Chair, I move that the committee favorably report H.R. 2693 as amended to the House with a recommendation that the bill do pass. Furthermore, I move that the staff be instructed to prepare the legislative report and make necessary technical and conforming changes, and that the chairman take all necessary steps to bring the bill before the House for consideration.
The questions on the motion to report the bill favorably. Those in favor of the motion will signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. The ayes have it. The bill is favorably reported. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid upon the table. Members will have 2 subsequent calendar days in which to submit supplemental, minority, or additional views on the measure. I thank the members for their patience, but hopefully your patience is still there's some left, because we now move to H.R. 5716. We will now consider it's the Safer Oil Natural Gas Drilling Technology Research Development Act. I recognize myself for 5 minutes, and since I have already described the bill earlier, I will stick with that description. And now I yield to Mr. Hall for any remarks on the bill.
Mr. Chairman, as I mentioned in my opening statement on the beginning of this markup, this committee print is the product of extensive negotiations with the majority to develop compromise legislation strengthening Section 999 program on oil and natural gas drilling technologies. I'd make 3 primary changes to the existing statute. It shifts the focus of each of the program's 4 elements toward advancing safety and accident prevention and mitigation technologies associated with oil and natural gas exploration and production. It adjusts the allocations among these 4 programs, reducing deepwater and unconventional onshore natural gas programs by a small amount, while increasing the allocation for Department of Energy in-house research from 25% to 35%. And it redefines and expands the scope of offshore R&D activities to those involving water depths of 1,000 feet or greater, That's a reduction from the 5,000 feet in current law, and in doing so modifies the current focus on, quote, ultra-deepwater, quote, activities to pertain simply to deepwater activities. Additionally, the bill makes numerous additional minor changes to the management and structure of the 999 program while preserving its original goal and objective to advance safe and economically responsible drilling. While the precise focus and detailed language in this committee print is less than ideal in my opinion, and I suspect the chairman might agree with me for different reasons, it represents a fair and reasonable compromise that preserves and strengthens the Section 999 program. As I indicated in my opening statement, this is the only R&D program in the federal government capable of ramping up activities quickly and effectively to address the renewed interest in drilling technology research in the wake of the Deepwater Horizon disaster. Given this administration's efforts to terminate any and all research and development relating to oil and natural gas, this program is all the more vital. I want to again extend my thanks to Chairman Gordon for working with me on this bill, and I look forward to continued bipartisan cooperation on the bill as the legislative process moves forward. And, sir, I do yield back my land.
Thank you, Mr. Hall, for those remarks, but more importantly, thank you for the cooperation. And I want to thank the minority and majority staff for their work on bringing this bill before us. Does anyone else wish to be recognized? If not, then I ask unanimous consent that the bill is considered as read and open to amendment at any point, and that the members proceed with the amendments in the order of the roster. Without objection, so ordered. The first amendment on the roster is a manager's amendment offered by the chair. The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment number 006, amendment to H.R. 5716, offered by Mr. Gordon of Tennessee.
I ask unanimous consent to dispense with the reading. Without objection, so ordered. I recognize myself for 5 minutes to explain the amendment. In addition to making clarifying and conforming changes, my manager's amendment incorporates a number of our members' concerns and has been worked out in advance with Mr. Hall through this amendment. Mr. Lujan seeks to ensure that the Secretary would partner with all eligible entities such as universities, private firms, and national labs. Dr. Baird makes in addition to recognize that the role of the human factors in safety-related decisions making and seeking to draw out analogous research from other risk-intensive industries. Dr. Lipinski specifies that the DOE program will include as a focus area development of methodologies for risk management. Mr. Hall ensures that the advisory committee includes only individuals who are highly technically or scientifically qualified to advise the Secretary on the research activities, and we reinstate language to ensure that the activities of the research consortium and DOE are coordinated and not duplicative. I appreciate the time these members and Mr. Hall's staff has put in making this a better amendment through the manager's amendment, and I urge its adoption. Is there further discussion on the amendment?
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Hall is recognized.
The manager's amendment makes several minor changes to the underlying committee print, including specifying additional R&D activities for the Section 999 program and eligibility requirements for program applicants and advisory committee members. This was crafted in bipartisan fashion, and these changes improve the underlying legislation, so I urge passage of the manager's amendment.
Governor Garamendi is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your amendments. Just a question, clarification, if I could. Yesterday I met with Sandia National Laboratories, who have been involved in the oil spill, and in their opinion, the methodology used by the national labs to assure the safety and reliability of the nuclear weapons programs, that methodology is applicable to the issues of deepwater drilling. I believe your amendment, your manager's amendment, does allow the national laboratories to engage specifically in the risk assessment and providing their expertise in setting out a methodology to assure the maximum safety and reliability.
I think that Mr. or Dr. Lipinski's amendment would satisfy that concern.
Thank you.
Is there further discussion on the amendment? If no, the vote occurs upon the amendment. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. The second amendment on the roster is an amendment offered by the gentleman from California. Mr. Garamendi, are you ready to proceed with your amendment? The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment number 005, amendment to H.R. 5716, offered by Mr. Garamendi of California.
I ask unanimous consent to dispense with reading. Without objection, so ordered. I recognize the gentleman for 5 minutes to explain his amendment.
It won't take 5 minutes. Mr. Chairman, this amendment simply removes a language that specifies the Department of Interior, the Secretary of the Department, and makes it a more broader section to include all those relevant federal agencies. That's for support of the amendment.
If there's no...
Chairman,
Mr. Hall is recognized.
This amendment simply directs the Secretary of Energy to consult with the Interagency Coordinating Committee on Oil Pollution Research, which was addressed in the first bill we considered today. I support the passage. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. It certainly makes...
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Rohrabacher is recognized.
So this is an amendment to foster cooperative effort and interagency action. But let's see now, we've had one for international cooperation and now another verification of that. So I'm still trying to figure out the opposition to the amendment that I offered, but that's okay. Thank you.
Well, Mr. Chair, if I might, to my colleague from California, just give it up and move on.
Well, with that, then, if there's no further
Get over it.
if there's no further discussion, those all in favor of the amendment say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. The third amendment on the roster is an amendment offered by the gentleman from Texas, Mr. McCall. Are you ready to proceed with your amendment?
I am. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment number 002, amendment to H.R. 5716, offered by Mr. McCall.
I ask unanimous consent to dispense with the reading. Without objection, so ordered. I recognize the gentleman for 5 minutes to explain his amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a simple amendment that is aimed at reinforcing the emphasis in the underlying bill on advancing environmentally responsible oil and gas exploration and production activities. Specifically, the amendment adds to the list of research and technology focus areas provided for in the bill's deep water and unconventional onshore oil and natural gas drilling subprograms to include a utilization of exploration and production methods and materials that reduce the potential impact of such activities on the environment. In the wake of the Deepwater Horizon disaster, this is an area in obvious need of further study. While the language of this amendment is intended to be broad and encompassing, it may help to advance, for example, understanding of potential impacts of and alternatives to chemicals added to drilling muds, such as those used in the recent top kill procedure. Similar research needs exist with respect to onshore deep natural gas drilling activities. I understand that the consortium funded by this program is already moving in this direction with respect to their research activities, but this will affirm and codify this move with explicit statutory language and further improve our ability to access these valuable oil and gas resources safely and effectively. And with that, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. McCall. Interestingly, I had asked about just such an amendment, that this is an area that needs to be looked into, and I was told you had an amendment, and I welcome it. It is a good amendment. And Mr. Hall, did you like to make a statement?
Well, yeah, Mr. Chairman, at the risk of you telling me and Mr. Rohrabacher to get over it, I just want to say it's a good amendment, and I support its passage, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. Is there further discussion on the amendment?
Mr. Chairman.
Oh, I don't think he's gotten over it.
I haven't gotten over it yet.
Okay. Mr. Rohrabacher is recognized for some additional therapy.
There it is. There it is. And let me just note again about something else. That almost all of the money that has been spent on research for the Department of Energy has been funneled into research when we're talking about fossil fuels research for the Department of Energy, has been channeled into basically developing carbon sequestration. And again, we now are living with the consequences of this folly of what I consider to be a misallocation of funds based on a scientific what I would say scientific nonsense in terms of global warming. Carbon sequestration, what is the harm that we have, that is done to our society and to the world based on this, what I consider to be non-scientific approach and talking about global warming. What it is we haven't spent the money at the Department of Energy to develop the technology that we need to have safe oil and natural gas extraction that we can put to use for our people. So instead of spending the money on that, we're spending money on carbon sequestration. And so what I'm trying to point out here is this amendment will come to grips with this and start directing research back to where it should be, and that is, if we depend so much right now on oil and gas for our country's prosperity, we should, if we're spending money at the Department of Energy for research, it shouldn't go into areas that are not dramatically impacting on our prosperity and our security for today. So again, I support this amendment because I think that it is undoing some really past mistakes in the direction of our research dollars at the Department of Energy. And I appreciate that. One other thing is that we have to take a look at the money that has been spent in developing of new technologies. Again, it wasn't being done by our own government. A private sector person testified here. He put his own money into developing technologies for cleanup. And again, what happened to that? First of all, the federal government should have been the one spending the money for a general cleanup technology, but Kevin Costner ended up putting his own money into developing centrifuge technology for separating oil from water. But yet it sat there on the shelf, unused, for 15 years because we have policies of our government and policies of our regulatory agencies that were demanding what? Perfection rather than something that could be useful and have a positive impact. So I would suggest that as we move forward now, and I visited an offshore oil rig off my district during the break, it's really important that we take these things seriously and that we take a look at the allocation of these funds and realize that perhaps this tragedy in the Gulf will have sort of opened our eyes to the fact that yes, we can oppose or we can support the theory of global warming, but we should darn well be making sure that those things that we do depend on are being done safely and that the allocation of our research dollars will go to promote that and have a positive impact on our safety today, rather than relying on Kevin Costner and channeling our own monies into things that perhaps don't meet the most serious challenge that we face. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. I support this amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Robacher. And I ask unanimous consent that in the future that you can just say number one and that we will put that statement back into the record. Is there further discussion on the amendment? If not, all in favor of the amendment say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. The fourth amendment is an amendment that was going to be offered by Ms. Edwards. I think she has made her point, and so we will move on then to amendment number 5. The fifth amendment on the roster is an amendment offered by the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Inglis. Are you ready to proceed with your amendment?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I've got an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment number 003, amendment to H.R. 5716, offered by Mr. Inglis of South Carolina.
I ask unanimous consent to dispense with the reading. Without objection, so ordered. I recognize the gentleman for 5 minutes to explain his amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This amendment ensures that RIPC, which is the Research Partnership to Secure Energy for America, will incorporate all activities related to improving safety and reducing potential environmental risk into their annual report. The changes we're making today in support of drilling research will ensure that RIPC has a renewed focus on not only getting us hard-to-reach oil and gas, but doing so at minimal risk to the personnel involved and to the surrounding environment. When the Deepwater Horizon rig caught fire and sank, we learned a lot about the risk of developing of deepwater drilling to BP and to the people of the Gulf Coast. we learned a lot, too, about the limits of our regulatory system. 86 days into the biggest environmental disaster in U.S. history, and there's still a hole a mile below the sea, gushing oil and gas into our waters. If anything is certain, it's that our capabilities to mitigate a disaster of this magnitude lag behind our ability to create one. We can't get this half right. If we're going to research for oil at the sea floor, we have to know how to prevent or tackle an incident of this magnitude. Blame for this incident is not reserved for BP or the drilling industry. That blame should be shared with a woefully unprepared regulatory system that allowed this industry to self-regulate. While drilling policy is beyond the jurisdiction of this committee, we have an opportunity today to help the industry find the tools they need to drill safely and to give the Department of Interior the expertise they need to hold drilling companies accountable for proper, accurate contingency plans. Let's do our jobs and assure the American people that Congress is working to safeguard their health and health of our natural resources. We can prevent another disaster like this from happening again. RIPC is a broad and active consortium already exploring ways to reorient their focus to meet major challenges made obvious by the Deepwater Horizon disaster. Let's give them an opportunity to answer those tough research questions. This discussion would be incomplete, though, Mr. Chairman, without expressing the hope of an America that would be no longer dependent on oil. Here's an obvious example of the extreme risk we take to fuel our economy on fossil fuels. Let's keep our focus on finding new solutions to our energy challenges so we can fuel our economy on American ingenuity instead. I encourage the adoption of this amendment, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Mr. Inglis, and more importantly, thank you for your continued good commitment to this this committee. And if there's no further discussion on the amendment, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. The sixth amendment on the roster is an amendment offered by the gentleman also once again from South Carolina. Mr. Inglis, are you ready to proceed with your amendment?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment number 004, amendment to H.R. 5716, offered by Mr. Inglis of South Carolina.
I ask unanimous consent to dispense with the reading. Without objection, so ordered. I recognize the gentleman for 5 minutes to explain the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This amendment will ensure that RIPC regularly issues awards specifically for safety and accident prevention and mitigation. While these areas are incorporated as a new focus area for RIPC awards, we cannot emphasize enough that any progress in drilling technology should be matched by progress in minimizing the impact of drilling on personnel and on the environment. Let's make sure that we can explore and develop our resources in a safe, environmentally sound way. I encourage adoption of this amendment and yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Mr. Inglis. Is there further discussion on the amendment? If not, all in favor of the amendment say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. If there are no other amendments, I think that we have now set a new Science and Technology Committee indoor world's record for the most amendments in one day, and I thank everyone for their patience. So if there are no other amendments, then H.R. 5716 as amended. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed, no. The ayes have it. The agreement is, in the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. I now recognize Mr. Hall.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the committee favorably report H.R. 5716 as amended to the House with the recommendation that the bill do pass. Furthermore, I move that staff be instructed to prepare the legislative report and make necessary technical and conforming changes, and that the chairman take all necessary steps to bring the bill before the House for consideration.
The question is on the motion to report the bill favorably. Those in favor of the motion will signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it. The bill is favorably reported. Without objection, the motion is reconsidered as laid upon the table. Members will have 2 subsequent calendar days in which to submit supplemental, minority, or additional views to the measure. And I want to again thank the hardcore for hanging through here for the last several hours. And also announce that, as many of you know, I'm an only child, but I do have cousins, and I want to welcome my cousins, the Barton family, here today.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I just want to inform the chairman's cousins, this gentleman is an outstanding member of the Congress and a great chairman, and I think that's shared on bipartisan basis. We're all privileged to serve with him, and we're honored by your presence as well. Thank you.
Well, it's hard to top that, so this committee is concluded. Thank you.